What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson, and free agency is next month, and the New York Giants currently have an okay amount of salary cap space prepared for this free agency period. But how could they add some more money to spend? How could they get a little bit more funding to re-sign guys like Saquon Barkley, like Xavier McKinney, or target some of these top free agent offensive linemen that we've discussed, like a Michael Onwenu or a Jonah Williams? How can they afford these guys? What can they do to free up some more money this upcoming offseason? That's what we're going to go ahead and tackle in today's episode. But before we dive into all that, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts on the topics down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And how much salary cap space do the New York Giants actually have available to them this offseason, and how can they create more?
I'm doing pretty well. No, guys, I think you'll be encouraged by what we have to say in this episode. I know Dan Duggan of The Athletic reported this morning a couple of cap figures that should support the Giants' ability to spend this upcoming offseason and protect themselves from the future. Now, here, I'll preface this by saying you don't want to have to restructure contracts before they even start, right? Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence are on long-term deals. We signed them to pretty substantial contracts last offseason, and we're already having to restructure them. And why? Well, because Daniel Jones is going to earn $46.5 million this upcoming season, and we need money to spend to reinforce the team as a whole. We need a cornerback. We need pass rushing support. We need offensive line support. We may need to pay a running back. We may need to bring back Xavier McKinney. We need money, and we need it now. And unfortunately, the Jones cap hit is substantial. We have to work around that, but there are some options for us here. Now, right off the bat, Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, you can save about a combined $25 million in salary space, which brings us to right around $50 million in available space. Andrew Thomas, if they restructure, it's a max restructure, by the way. If they maximum restructure that contract before his roster bonus comes in on March 17th, they'll save $14.4 million. If they do it after the roster bonus, which they would not do that because it would be stupid, they would save $10.4 million. So there's a $4 million differential they can save, obviously, by restructuring him before that roster bonus. So $14.4 million from Andrew Thomas, and another $11.4 million from Dexter Lawrence. So right now you're looking at a pretty nice amount of money you can spend. That money pays for Xavier McKinney and then some. That's really what that looks like. So $11.2 million for Dexter Lawrence, excuse me, not $11.4 million. So still, marginal difference there, but around $25 million in additional salary space, and you're able to, re-sign Xavier McKinney and probably sign yourself a CB2 at the same time. This CB2 market is extremely deep, and I think we could probably get a nice little bargain option there to pair with Deonte Banks in the secondary. So you retain Xavier McKinney, and you get yourself a CB2, or you use that money on an offensive lineman. In addition to that, you have Mark Lewinsky, who is, definitely going to be cut. The Giants save $5.7 million by cutting him, so you can add that to the $25 million, so you're around $32 million now. You're in a good spot. You have a lot of money. You could sign CB2, a decent offensive lineman, and bring back Xavier McKinney with our available salary space now. Keep in mind, we have to adjust for the draft class and having some money going into the season. So where else are we going to open up money? There's one contract we cannot touch, and it is that of Daniel Jones' contract. If we need like a $2 or $3 million going into the season, I could see us maybe moving some of that guaranteed money into the future, just a little bit, a marginal amount that wouldn't make much of a difference. But I do think that we should stay away from moving any money from Daniel Jones' contract into the future for one primary reason. And Anthony, I'm sure you're going to agree with me here. If the Giants decide to move on from him next year, it's definitely in our best interest to avoid paying him more in the future. So I do believe, that's what we should be doing, restructuring Andrew Thomas, restructuring Dexter Lawrence, and do not restructure Daniel Jones' deal because we just don't know what his future looks like. We know Dexy and we know Thomas are on this team long term. That's for sure. So, Anthony, what are your thoughts there about the financials?
Yeah, my thoughts on the financials. Listen, we did an episode, I think, last month, and I kind of discussed that Andrew Thomas contract and that Dexter Lawrence contract as well, and kind of mentioned that those are two players that we know are going to be here long term. We know that they were signed to 4-year deals, and these are guys who are going to play out those contracts. It would have to have there would have to be something drastic that changes here in this organization for the Giants to feel comfortable moving on from either Andrew Thomas or Dexter Lawrence in the next couple of seasons. So knowing that these guys are going to be around long term, you can feel comfortable restructuring those contracts and freeing up that $25 million in salary cap space for this offseason. Because Andrew Thomas isn't going anywhere. Dexter Lawrence isn't going anywhere. So if you don't want to pay them all that money on the cap hit right now, pay it down in the future when you have more salary cap space available to you. Even if Daniel Jones plays out the entirety of that 4-year contract, by the time it expires, that's when those cap hits that you restructured for Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas will be coming into effect when Daniel Jones' contract is off the books. So you'll have the money available to you in the future, so you might as well utilize that future money. And again, I've used this term many times to describe Joe Schoen rather. I've always said that he's flexible. The Giants had a flexible offseason in 2023. They signed a lot of flexible contracts, meaning that they can get in and out of all the contracts that they signed. A lot of them were incentive-based, like that Paris Campbell deal, and a lot of them had front-loaded money that you can move towards the back end if you need to in the future, and that is the case with these Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence contracts. So restructuring those deals, I'm all for it. I think when you're looking at the Giants' salary cap space right now, yes, they have, what is it? The number is $21 million, but it's really $14 million in effective salary cap space, which takes into account that a team has to have at least 51 players signed and the projected rookie class. Now, that could change, that $14 million in effective salary cap space, because the Giants could trade for more draft picks, they could trade away draft picks, and that, of course, will change how much effective salary cap space they have. They could trade up in the draft, which would also affect it. So that's subject to change, but that working number of around 14, that's not really enough to re-sign both Saquon, both McKinney, or even go into free agency, bring in a competent offensive lineman, a competent wide receiver. It's simply just not enough to spend in free agency $14 million for a Giants team that has holes all over the place, something that Joe Schoen has even admitted. So in order to create some of that money, to sign some of those players, extend some of those players, you're going to have to do some salary cap maneuvering, and that's going to start, in my opinion, with the restructuring of Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence's contracts to save that $25 million. Because then you're talking about having 25, now 35, okay, now $40 million to spend. Then if you cut Glowinski, you're talking about having, maybe even Darius Slayton and maybe even Darren Waller. You can have up to $60 million to spend if you're the New York Giants, and that's in effective salary cap space, not total salary cap space, but effective. So that's taking into account the fact that they have to have 51 players on the roster and have to sign their rookie draft class. So $60 million, and again, because you can be flexible with these contracts, front load some, back load others, and make sure that the cap hits are lower in this first year, the Giants could actually bring in a pretty significant amount of talent to their roster this upcoming offseason. $60 million can go a long way. That can get you a starting offensive tackle, plus a starting cornerback, and maybe even a starting edge rusher. They can do that much for you if you have $60 million in effective salary cap space to spend in an offseason. So, in my opinion, the restructuring of Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence, no brainer for me. If the Giants want to be competitive this upcoming season, you have to make those moves to free up some of that money. But then there is one move that I don't think you can afford to make. Because, yeah, you can free up $23 million this offseason by restructuring Daniel Jones' contract, but then all those other contracts that I just mentioned that you want to backload, you can't do that anymore because now Daniel Jones' cap hit is too big in those future seasons. Daniel Jones' cap hit lowers significantly after the 2024 season, and of course they can cut him after the 2024 season and basically have, I think, $20 million in a salary cap hit in 2025 for Jones. Now that's ideal for a quarterback that you don't know whether or not he's going to be here long term. Moving that money towards the back end of that contract would be a drastic mistake for the New York Giants, and it's one that I don't think they're going to make. I don't think there's any possibility that they restructure Daniel Jones' contract. Freeing up that $23 million, again, you can balloon that number up to $80 million now in salary cap space for this offseason. But what are you going to do? Sign $80 million of one-year contracts? That's not possible. You have to sign these players long term. It's the only way they're going to join your team. And if you're moving some of that salary cap space in Daniel Jones' contract to future seasons, you can't sign those players. Even if you freed up all that salary cap space this offseason, you can't sign them long term because now Daniel Jones' salary cap hit is too large for those upcoming seasons. So Daniel Jones' contract needs to remain untouched. I'm confident that Joe Schoen understands that because of last offseason, we had a similar conversation about Leonard Williams. He had this massive $32 million salary cap hit. A lot of Giants fans said, okay, can we restructure it? Can we extend him? Can we cut him? Joe Schoen said, no, we're not going to touch it. We are salary cap healthy. We can make this work with that big cap hit that Leonard Williams has and go into the season with this roster and just figure it out in the future. They did that. It allowed them to trade Leonard Williams, get a second-round pick in return for him, and we all kind of agree that that was an excellent deal for the New York Giants. So Joe Schoen understands the value of not touching certain contracts, so I think he knows Daniel Jones's contract, not one that can be touched. That's one that's going to have to remain for those future seasons, having the ability to get out of them. Because, and before I hand it to you, Alex, what I'll say is, when you really look at Daniel Jones's contract, it wasn't a 4-year deal. And I know we've had this conversation before. A lot of Giants fans say he is the quarterback of the future. That's why they signed him to a 4-year contract. They really signed him to a 2-year contract with a 2-year team option. All of that guaranteed money, all $80 million of the $160, first of all, that's something to take note of right there. How much confidence did they have in him? Only half of that contract was actually guaranteed. You'll see contracts guaranteed up to 80, 90% if you're Kirk Cousins, 100% in this NFL if you're a proven talent. Daniel Jones was not a proven talent, so he only got half of his contract guaranteed, and that half happened to be front-loaded in those first 2 seasons of the 4-year deal. So it really wasn't a 4-year contract. It was a 2-year contract, and if he plays well in those first 2 years where he's actually making that money, sure, they'll continue to pay him for the following 2 seasons, but he really signed a 2-year contract with a little bit of dead money at the end of it, just so that the New York Giants could get it under the salary cap space, but ultimately, it's really 2023, 2024 were his years to kind of make the most of that contract and prove that he deserved the final 2 seasons. Halfway through those first 2 years, not looking so good. Torn ACL, neck injury, 6 starts, 6 interceptions, 2 touchdowns. Daniel Jones is not off to a good start on this contract, and it's very likely that in 2025 they will take the out on that contract and free up that money for the future. But, of course, we'll see what happens. This is going to be a wild offseason for the New York Giants. We don't know what they're going to do at the quarterback position. Buckle up, Daniel Jones. You might be headed to Siberia. That's what Phil Simms said, but not in as many words. He told him to buckle up for the offseason, and that's how I'm spinning it because I think it's fun. But Daniel Jones, man, massive question mark there. Alex, how are you feeling about that contract? You know, kind of breaking it down in that fashion. What do you see there with it being more of a 2-year contract than it really is a 4-year contract?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing because it kind of crossed my mind as you were speaking there, and I actually don't think the Giants could have drawn up a worse scenario than what happened. You know what I mean? Like, I think what they thought was going to happen was that the offensive line would improve gradually. Daniel Jones would be coming off one of his best seasons yet, a playoff appearance, a playoff win, and they would compound on that, and he would get marginally better. Instead, what happened is the offensive line crumbled in the first game of the season. Daniel Jones suffers a neck injury a couple weeks later against the Dolphins, I believe. And then, you know, that neck injury forces him to miss a couple games. And it also sparks the idea that he may not, you know, if he has another injury of that nature, his career could be over. And then he comes back and tears his ACL. You couldn't have wrote a worse script for Daniel Jones if you tried. You know, I think Joe Schoen, when he signed that contract, when he gave that contract to Daniel Jones, was thinking, even if he is not great next year, we'll have one more year to turn things around and then make that decision. Instead, the worst case scenario happened. If you've ever watched The Perfect Storm, that's exactly what happened to this Giants team. The offensive line crumbles. You know, DJ gets a neck injury that could end his career in the future, and then he tears his ACL. Like, you couldn't have come up with a worst case scenario if you tried, you know? And if you're the Giants, now you're like, well, damn, like that couldn't have gone any freaking worse. Thank God we have the out in the contract to make a decision for the future at the very least. And here's what I'll say. There's a argument here to make that you use Daniel Jones as a bridge to another player, whether it is developing a guy for a season. You know, even if they go and draft Jaden Daniels or Drake May, they can let him compete with Daniel Jones. Like, you know, let the best man win. If Daniel Jones wins the job, you know, you obviously have a year for him to learn and get ready and prepare and then take over in 2025. When now you're taking out in Daniel Jones' contract, you have a stupid amount of money. You have a bunch of guys on long-term deals, Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, you know, prospectively Xavier McKinney. You have Deontay Banks, a lot of rookie talent. You know, you have a substantial money to spend next offseason as well. And you build around this young player, and that was a year, you know, learning in the system, building some sort of repertoire, some sort of, you know, consistency in terms of his preparation. And you kind of transfer all the load to that player. Maybe that's the way the Giants look to do it. It could be a guy like J.J. McCarthy, too. A lot of people love him. You know, it's not out of the realm of possibility. The Giants want to draft J.J. McCarthy, let him sit a year behind Daniel Jones, Jones and then transition to him in 2025. That's a very realistic thing that a lot of people will likely point to. Is it my preference? You guys know I'm a Jaden Daniels guy, but I'm not running this team, so we have to kind of settle for what we see. But with that being said, Daniel Jones right now, that contract, it's terrible because the worst case scenario happened. It's terrible because it forces us to restructure other contracts in which we would like to not do. Preferably would have waited as long as possible, but instead we have to do it now, which sucks, but it is what it is. So, Daniel Jones, he's a great dude. I have nothing against him personally. The contract just is tough in terms of a long-term perspective. Like, we're probably taking the out in that deal, guys. Even if Daniel Jones, look, they keep saying the expectation is that Daniel Jones starts week 1. That doesn't mean there's not going to be a young player right behind him developing behind the scenes. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean they're not going to draft a guy to help prepare for the future. It's the kind of the writing's on the wall, in my opinion. And I think it really comes down to this: building out the foundation this offseason. If the Giants want to transition to another quarterback, if they want to go get another guy in the future, they need to focus on building out a good team, whether that looks like finding a top WR1 that's going to be on a rookie contract like Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, or going for a star tight end like Brock Bowers, like bringing back McKinney, like signing Jermaine Illuminor, developing your talent with a coaching staff that can actually do that. Notably Carmen Bracillo, obviously, or Bracillo, coming in here and hoping to develop guys like Evan Neal, or develop guys like John Michael Schmitz or Marcus McKethan or Josh Azudu. Like, there's a lot of variables that are in the works here, but building a foundation so that whoever plays quarterback for us in the future is in a good spot to actually succeed. That's the most important variable to me right now, because Daniel Jones has been kind of put in a bad spot every single year. Bad offensive lines, bad receiver corps, inconsistent defenses. I feel for the guy. Like, I feel bad that he never really stood a chance. Do I ever think Daniel Jones is going to be Patrick Mahomes? No, but I do think that we never will get to see the upside of Daniel Jones because we never put him in a spot that he could be good. I don't want to make the same mistake twice. We have to learn from our mistake this time around. Put a good foundation in place, get a good offensive line, and then install that quarterback, or at least, have a better spot for a rookie going into it. That's kind of how I feel right now in terms of the future of this team, and the financials of Daniel Jones' contract play a big part in that equation.
100%. I mean, listen, everything that the New York Giants do this offseason is affected by that Daniel Jones contract. Whether positively, negatively, it's impacted by that Daniel Jones contract. I mean, whether you're talking about them drafting a quarterback in the first round or the fifth round, whether you're talking about them re-signing Xavier McKinney and Saquon Barkley or letting both of those guys walk, it all does circle back around to that Daniel Jones contract. And ultimately, that's going to be the one that if Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are on the outs in 2025, it's going to be because of that Daniel Jones contract. It's making it really difficult for this team to build this roster properly. And if Daniel Jones doesn't put up or shut up in 2024, if he doesn't prove to be that franchise quarterback, then it's a mistake. That contract was objectively a mistake. So he's got 1 year to turn the narrative and change everything. And he's got everything stacked up against him. I mean, you're talking about a quarterback coming off of a neck injury, coming off of a torn ACL, still going to be playing behind a bad offensive line most likely. I can't imagine that the Giants' offensive line overnight transforms into this top-tier unit, right? I mean, listen, they've got Andrew Thomas. He's elite. They've got John Michael Schmitz. I think he's going to take a step forward. But then there's 3 other positions on the offensive line that the Giants have to figure out in one offseason. It's not very likely. If they figure out 1 or 2 of them, good job, and the Giants' offensive line is going to be better. But Daniel Jones isn't going to be playing behind an elite offensive line in 2024. It's almost impossible for that to be the case. And on top of that, he's not going to be playing with elite playmakers. Darren Waller, clearly not the elite guy that we thought he was when they traded for him last offseason, mainly because he can't stay healthy. And on top of that, he might be gone because of the salary cap relief that they can get from cutting him or trading him or restructuring him, whatever they decide to do. But his contract is one that they might look to get out of this offseason. So the Giants don't have any elite playmakers, especially if Saquon Barkley leaves. I think that some fans might debate whether or not he is elite. I think that he still has the capabilities of being elite with a good offensive line and good offense. But unfortunately, again, those factors are holding Saquon Barkley back. So no elite playmakers unless maybe they draft a Malik Neighbors in the first round. But even then, rookie receivers are great, but they're not immediately elite. They're rookies. They still got to develop. So no matter what, Daniel Jones is stepping into what looks to be a pretty bad situation in 2024 coming off of a torn ACL. So it's not going to be a fun time for him. It's not going to be a fun time for the Giants if they have to make some difficult decisions here. But ultimately, I think that all roads lead back to Rome here, with the New York Giants taking a quarterback in this draft at some point. Just because there is so much uncertainty, and this offense isn't ready for Daniel Jones to step in and immediately compete with it. That's just the reality of the situation. If the Giants had all those other pieces in place, Alex, if they had 5 quality offensive linemen, a superstar receiver, a solid tight end, and a good running back, if they had all those things, I'd probably be a little bit more behind the idea of Daniel Jones being the starter in 2024. I'd say, okay, well, he's returning from this injury, take some time off, but he's still got a great offense around him and a great play caller in Brian Daboll. Maybe he can absolutely take this thing further than he did back in 2022. But that's just not the reality of the situation. Instead, Daniel Jones coming off of this torn ACL is stepping into an offense devoid of talent for the most part. And that's the scary part of this equation. So that's why the kind of point that you just made, reboot and reset. You can bring some holdovers, right? Like Andrew Thomas can be your holdover piece on this offense. Maybe Saquon Barkley as well. Maybe Darius Slayton, because he's proven to be a very quality number 2 receiver. And Wan'Dale Robinson's good. Jalen Hyatt's good, right? So there's some decent players, but no superstars. So you've got a foundation for your offense, but you don't have a ready-built offense that's ready to succeed in 2024. That's why instead of bringing back your quarterback who's coming off this injury, it might benefit you to bring in a foundational piece at quarterback, a rookie who can develop with these other foundational pieces and hopefully eventually, whether that be 2025 or 26, then become your long-term answer at the quarterback position. And that's not to say that Daniel Jones won't have a solid career elsewhere. I liked Daniel Jones a whole lot when he was playing good football for the New York Giants. At the end of the day, I don't have anything personal against any of these players. I just love my New York Giants, and I want to see them succeed, no matter who's playing quarterback for this team. But unfortunately, it's been a lot of losing under Daniel Jones's tenure here with the Giants, and because of the way that this team is set up, I don't necessarily see the brightest future in 2024 with this offense. They still have a lot of work to do and not a ton of salary cap space to get that work done. So quarterback is probably going to be the pick here for the Giants, but again, it's going to be tough picking 6th overall. So maybe they do run it back with an elite playmaker in Daniel Jones. And I hope for the best. I hope Daniel Jones is able to take this team far. But kind of went on a random tangent there, Alex, but really just breaking that down, how the salary cap is set up and how this offense is set up. It just seems like now is the perfect time for the Giants to reboot that rookie quarterback window and go ahead and find their guy. But it is easier said than done. And it's going to help. Picking 6th overall is going to hold them back without a shadow of a doubt. That's going to be the biggest barrier for them this offseason. If they were picking 1st overall, I have no doubts in my mind they'd be taking a quarterback. But picking 6th overall, again, it's easier said than done. They're going to have to hope that somebody falls, or they're going to have to get aggressive and trade up, or they're going to have to just take the best playmaker available for them, which, again, isn't the worst thing in the world because these guys are really talented, these top playmakers in this draft class. But, Alex, do you have any closing thoughts on the situation that's presented to this New York Giants offense and really how much work Joe Schoen has to get done with this salary cap and adding talent to this offense? It's not going to be an easy task.
It's not. And look, if I'm Joe Schoen, I understand that this might be my last shot. You know what I mean? Like, this may be his last season to get it right. His work is cut out for him, but I don't think that means you have to deviate from the plan. The plan was always, see if Daniel Jones can do it. We've seen the injury. We've seen the worst case scenario. We keep hearing, like Jordan Schultz keeps saying, and look, when you hear the same thing coming out of the same person, it makes me think it's more of a smokescreen. If you hear the same thing coming out of like 4 or 5 different people, it's like, all right, maybe there's more validity to this, but there's only one person saying the one thing, which makes me think he's being pushed a specific narrative to say, which makes me think there has to be a hole there. There has to be some sort of problem, because we're not hearing Jordan Renan say that. We're not hearing Dan Duggan say it. We're not seeing Art Stapleton say it. We're not seeing anyone else say that the Giants are 100% committed to Daniel Jones. None of them are reporting this. Only one person is. So that means they're getting it from one source, and that source is obviously pushing a specific narrative. So, we'll see what happens. Joe Schoen has tricked us before. He's told us one thing and done another. It's not the first time. GMs do this ahead of the draft. I have no idea what the Giants are going to do, but I'll tell you what, am I going to be mad if we walk away with Brock Bowers? Hell no. Am I going to be mad if we walk away with Malik Neighbors? Hell no. Those guys are elite level blue chip prospects. You know what I mean? Of course, we don't know what they'll be at the NFL level, but they are guys that will make an instant impact in a positive way on your franchise. So, am I going to be upset? Not a chance. Do I have my preferences? Of course. But again, like there's a lot of work to be done here financially with the draft. I'm happy that, we managed to keep a lot of our talent evaluators. I don't think, and like, I'm going to say this pretty like confidently, I don't think our last 2 draft classes were bad by any means. I think our coaching and development has been bad at a lot of positions. Bobby Johnson did an awful job developing Evan Neal. Horrendous. Same with John Michael Schmitz. The receivers, we still have a lot to see with guys like, Jalen Hyatt. And a lot of the receiving, like, woes have been a direct result of the offensive line failing to protect the quarterback. So these things are all correlated. The Wilkins brothers, horrendous job with getting the most out of some of these guys. Kayvon Thibodeau had a lot of sacks, but we didn't see the consistency we needed. The Giants just hired a new outside linebackers coach, and he's known for being a great teacher. So that's what I'm optimistic with. We brought in guys that are known for teaching, developing talent. That's where I'm excited. I'm excited to get the most out of our youngsters. And the Giants know, based on all these moves they're making in terms of developing players, I think that they acknowledge the fact that they're not getting the results that they intended, getting the most out of some of these elite blue chip prospects like Evan Neal, like Kayvon Thibodeau, like some of these guys. And I think we're going to see these guys kind of reach their potential. Hopefully we see that. We don't know for a fact, but the hope is we do. So I'm a little bit optimistic on that part. But I think we have plenty of talent. Just the coaching has been suspect this past season and developing players. So I hope we improve a lot there. But financially, there's ways to clear cap. We're not in that bad of a situation. But, man, Shane has his work cut out for him, that's for sure.
That's 100% for sure. I mean, this whole New York Giants team does. Brian Dable has his work cut out for him. He's got to turn this team around as well. We know that there's been a lot of reports about the locker room, about the coaching staff, how they feel about him. He did give Mike Kafka a promotion. Mike Kafka is now the assistant head coach. We'll see how that goes. Clearly a guy who's highly thought of around the NFL, whether, Giants fans think highly of Mike Kafka or not. He's highly thought of around the NFL and has a good shot at becoming a head coach soon. So now he's the assistant head coach. I think that's an interesting takeaway from this offseason. But it's going to be a long offseason. It's going to be an interesting offseason, but it's going to be a fun and exciting one. And I can't wait to break it all down right here on Fireside Giants. So make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. And comment your thoughts on the topics down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. But without further ado, we will catch you all on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.